fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin here to bring you an update on the Falcons' most recent signing. They have closed the deal with former Pro Bowl safety Justin Simmons, most recently of the Broncos, after some schmoozing perhaps by A.J. Terrell and Grady Jarrett at dinner. The former Pro Bowl safety agreed to terms with Atlanta on a one-year deal to join a defense that also just added Matthew Judon. So Falcons making a lot of moves at the last minute here before the season, kind of changing sort of the outlook of the team and sort of the priorities that we thought they had or didn't have or whatever. And it kind of continues their sort of unorthodox strategy, right, that we've been talking about, but takes it in a different direction, as the Falcons are certainly not going to be maintaining all of that future cap space that they were trying to protect with these two moves. But we will get into that in just a moment, guys, as you join us here on Dirty Birds and Brews. Thank you all for coming in. We're going to get to this big move, big fan of it, obviously. A lot to talk about with this one. Before we do, of course, want to bring you guys a word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football, from the preseason in the NFL. If you're a true degenerate, you know, I've said my piece about preseason betting. You know, if you want to do it, that's on you, right? But they've also got college football kicking off and the NFL season just a little bit away if you want to do futures. BetOnline's got every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. And if you think you know your stuff, you can get in on BetOnline's winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. And when the game's over, you can head on over to BetOnline's online casino, get in on a game of blackjack, game of poker, or unwind with one of BetOnline's 150 slots games. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website today and use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, and get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. So for today, let's talk about Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons had interest, obviously, from the Saints, so that adds a special cherry on top to this whole thing, right? Do we get to swipe a coveted player from the Saints away from the Saints coming to Atlanta? Love to see that, no matter what. But it wasn't just the Saints. Simmons was planning, I think, on going on a tour over the next week or so of several other teams that were interested in acquiring his services. He's sort of gone on visits throughout the offseason, but, you know, the idea, I think, with Justin Simmons has been that he's kind of wanted to take his time. He wants to make sure he's on a contender. He was trying to get as much compensation as he could, and I think his plan was to just sort of wait until towards the end of camp to make a decision on where he was going to go. I know some people have been asking me, like, oh, is he just like washed or something? Why did nobody want him? It's not because nobody wanted him. People have inquired. People have visited. People have been really looking to add him, but I think Simmons himself has kind of been trying to be more patient and kind of take an approach of we're going to wait and see what develops, because it didn't look like anyone was offering him what he was hoping to get, which, rumors was he was trying to continue on his path of, previously his contract had been, in the double digits. I think he was trying to get back to that double digit mark, and the market just wasn't there. He's 30 years old right now, which is really not that big a deal. But when teams are giving out these long-term big contracts with that type of money, they typically like to give it out to guys that are still in their 20s. And, Justin Simmons, already coming off one big contract, was trying to get that second cash in, didn't really materialize. And we could talk a little bit about, why that might be. But, honestly, I think he was just, since he wasn't going to get the big money from somebody, the next step was finding the right fit. And I think that's what he was kind of waiting to see what would materialize. And, I'm going to slander the Saints. So if you're a Saints fan watching this show, you should probably turn this off. But, I don't know how he could look at the Saints and what's going on there and be like, I want to be a part of this. This is going to get me where I want to go. That Saints team is in bad shape. They have just terrible cap problems and the offensive line issues that I've talked about on the show at length. Derek Carr was uninspiring at best last year. Their running backs are kind of losing steps. That team is just, it's on a downward spiral, and they just kind of refuse to accept it or move on from the past. So we'll see how bad the Saints are. I think they'll be fighting the Panthers for fourth place personally, but I am a hater, so just keep that in mind. But I don't think he was going to go there unless he didn't have a better option. And thankfully the Falcons kind of swooped in and presented him with a much better option. On a team that's on the upswing, in theory, right? I think we're all ready to be hurt again, right? But you look at the way this Falcons team has been constructed. They've got a lot of energy around this new coaching staff. They have an established and much better than Derek Carr quarterback in Kirk Cousins, who should be an instant sort of fit in this offense. They can immediately get this team into contention status, at least for winning the division, but hopefully for winning a couple playoff games, maybe sneaking in, to the conference championship if things go right, But I think, you look at the Saints, and I know there were other teams interested in Simmons. I think Atlanta provided a good opportunity for him, where there is a clear starting spot available. It's a clear upgrade for the Falcons, obviously, over Richie Grant or DeMarco Hellams. We're still hoping that maybe he will not miss the whole season. It sounds like he's going to be put on short-term IR whenever the season starts, and we'll just have to see how long that lasts. But, getting Simmons in here next to Jessie Bates. We know Jessie Bates is arguably the best safety in the NFL. He did not have a really good running mate last year. I think DeMarco Hellams was solid. Richie Grant, of course, oscillated between good and bad frequently. So Richie Grant is probably still going to be here. Hellams, we'll hope, is back at some point. And then there will be other depth behind them. But, Simmons as the second starter is a huge upgrade over Richie Grant or anything that DeMarco Hellams provided last year. Even if he's not at his peak anymore, Simmons is just a much more sound player, much more instinctual player, and, honestly, a very good run defender as well. So, I know some people, and we'll get into sort of Simmons and why maybe he hasn't been as highly coveted, or like people aren't willing necessarily to pay him what he was asking for this year. And it's because he did have a little bit of a fall off in sort of the deep coverage. I think his PFF coverage grade was down. It was still above average slightly, but it was not sky high anymore. And that honestly is okay. I think he's probably going to be more of the box focused safety for the Falcons. And I think that's absolutely a good fit for him. He's a great run defender. He's a really good blitzer as well. And I think in the past, he's been definitely able to do all the coverage responsibilities. And I really don't think that he's like washed in coverage or anything like that. But Jessie Bates is an elite back end safety. So we can just have Bates handle that. If Simmons is going to be a better run defender and pass rusher and a fine cover man that is obviously known for takeaways, I think that's totally fine. I think that's actually pretty perfect, because you would rather have Bates sitting further back, not have to have him come up in the box more than he needs to. Let Bates go back there, be the rangy free safety covering all that stuff, and Simmons can be the guy that's more of the box-focused safety, and there's going to be an upgrade, obviously, in coverage over what the Falcons have had in the past. But I think it's a great move from that angle. I do think that Bates and Simmons can coexist. Also, I think Simmons is a better deep safety than Richie Grant, obviously. Hellams, obviously, more of that box-focused safety. He's going to be a significant upgrade over any have had in the safety room other than Jessie Bates in quite a long time. And I don't really think he's washed. I think, you look at the context of that Broncos team. It was an absolute disaster. We all know that. The regime was planning to move on from him. We'll see how much of this sort of off-field sort of situation played into Simmons's final season in Denver. It's hard to be at your best when you're under those sort of conditions, right? We've seen this with Falcons players before. We've seen this with a lot of players where it's just it's a bad situation. It's not healthy for you. It's depressing. Everything kind of falling apart. The offense is just letting you down week after week. We're very familiar with that. So I have a lot of confidence in Simmons having a better year this year, certainly. The Broncos defense, again, last year, it was kind of inexplicably the year before it was very good. I still think they had the pieces to be a very good defense. Again, I think the offense just let them down a lot. And it's tough to deal with that. I think we saw the Falcons defense eventually sort of reach their limit on that as well towards the end of the season. So, I think this is a great move for Atlanta. And so, like, even from just the basic idea of, I think Richie Grant was not going to be good enough as your second safety. I'm still hopeful that he can be a quality third safety, and maybe that he could have been like a solid starter. Like maybe he takes that step, becomes that more consistent solid starter. But Justin Simmons is on another level. And the Falcons also aren't really taking a big risk here with Simmons. I was sort of expecting that he'd want a multi-year deal, but the other option for him was to take a 1-year deal and hope that this sort of resets his market. If he has a great year, obviously, maybe he could go cash in again, and that seems to be the route that he preferred. Or maybe the Falcons preferred. I'm not really sure. But the Falcons end up signing Simmons to this 1-year, $8 million deal with about $7.5 million guaranteed, which I think is very fair for Simmons. I was expecting maybe more than this. So I think Simmons wanted to be here. So he took basically a fully guaranteed year to come to Atlanta, have a chance to play next to Jessie Bates, which can't really hurt, right? That certainly won't hurt his value. He gets to play, obviously we're still kind of waiting to see how this pass rush is going to turn out. But after the addition of Matthew Judon, who we know is a huge upgrade over anything the Falcons have had, other than maybe Calais Campbell, right? I mean, Campbell was still very good last year. Judon, if healthy and back, like he is definitely the best pass rush, like the best edge rusher we've had in a long, long time here in Atlanta. So maybe Judon can be enough on the edge, even if we don't get much other help on the edge. We'll see. Ebiketie did have a good practice apparently yesterday or the day before, where he had like 3 sacks and some pressures. So maybe Ebiketie's been inspired by the addition of Judon as well. But either way, like we've got Judon. I think the interior is going to be really good. We're going to have a lot of pressure coming from the interior defensive line, and that will be good. And then the Falcons are going to just get creative with the blitzes and all this stuff. So I think the addition of Judon is absolutely massive as well. We talked about that a lot on the live show from Wednesday, so you could definitely go check that as well if you want more like Judon information. But I think really what this does, if you combine these moves together, it's a clear sign that the Falcons kind of recognized that the defense as it stood was just not going to cut it if they really wanted to compete. Like, I think the defense could have been good enough for this team. I think the defense was good enough for this team to win the NFC South, maybe win the first playoff game. But I think that the realistic chances of this team going further than that with the defense in its current construction, unless you had some like miraculous leaps and a bunch of things going right and all this stuff, I think the chances of that were very low. I think you were going to get outclassed the second you came up against those really good playoff teams in the NFC. Because even if the offense was good, because you just can't keep pace with the best offenses. Like, we don't know if this offense is really going to be elite or if it's just going to be like very good. Like, it's top 10 offense, great. But if you have a mediocre to bad defense and a top 10 offense, and just a top 10 offense, not a top 5 offense, that's not going to be enough to get past the teams that have a great offense and a good defense. Like, it's just, you were going to come up against teams that you were going to have a really tough time getting past without the defense being better. And I think Justin Simmons plus Matthew Judon, it's like, okay, now we can potentially see the path to this defense being good enough for a deep playoff run. And obviously we'll have to see how it comes together. Jimmy Lake's a new defensive coordinator in the NFL. We haven't seen exactly how Raheem's defense is going to be in Atlanta at 2. We don't know exactly how Zach Robinson's stuff is going to turn out. But what we do know is that the Falcons are making a clear and concerted effort to reinforce this year's team. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we sort of continue the episode. But I did want to mention, people have asked about the financials, so I'll go over that again real quick. The Falcons already did what I think was the easy move, which was to restructure Chris Lindstrom. That freed up about $9 million in cap space. And that was the easy, obvious move to do. Chris Lindstrom has a brand new contract. He's a young star player. There's no really downside to that, other than that it pushes a bit of money forward. But again, it doesn't actually push that much forward, but it does push $9 million, but it spreads it out over the course of Lindstrom's whole contract. So you're not really seeing a significant cap hit from that in the next few years. It's a couple million each year or whatever. Not a big deal. The other ones become a little bit more interesting, so I'm curious to see what they decide to do with these other restructures or a potential AJ Terrell extension. So Jake Matthews is the guy that could give you the most cap space with a restructure. I think you could create like up to $9.5 million approximately for Matthews if you maxed it out. And we know Matthews is starting to get up there. I think people assuming that he's close to retirement are probably incorrect. The Matthews family has notoriously played late into their 30s. Jake Matthews hasn't been like a top 5 left tackle, like elite left tackle of late, but he's still a good left tackle. And I think if he's a good left tackle, you keep riding that horse until he wants to stop. Until he wants to stop playing, you don't take him out. Like I think you keep going. And like the nice thing about Jake Matthews' contract, which he signed an extension back in 2022. Basically all of it is after this season, there's no more guaranteed money other than the signing bonus that's been prorated out. So, if the Falcons do restructure, Jake Matthews isn't going to become like incredibly difficult to cut or anything like that. But I still like the Falcons could move on from Jake Matthews, I guess is what I'm saying, in either of the next 2 years right now with big cap savings. I really don't think they're planning to do that or angling to do that, because when this contract expires, he'll be 34. So I think at that point, when you're considering another extension for Jake Matthews is probably when you're deciding if you want to re-up or not, and if you want to move on. It's probably why they're going to really prioritize drafting a tackle next year. But I think with Matthews, if they want to do the restructure with Matthews, I think it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think Jake Matthews has really shown any significant signs of slowing down. And, Jake Matthews is an absolute Iron Man. He knows how to take care of his body. He is a really good, really key player. And even if he's not elite left tackle, you're happy with a good left tackle. This is like, trust me, like you don't want to just go looking for another left tackle until you have, like, if you can do a Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix with left tackle, that's what you want. And I thought they would probably try to go down that well, this year. They did not. So we'll see. But I think next year, like, they need to get a tackle in here to start preparing for life after Jake Matthews. But at this point, I'm not really concerned about it, to be completely honest with you. He's 32 this year. That is not that old for tackles. It's just not. So I think the people worrying about Jake Matthews getting ready to retire, I don't think there's any indication of that. Doesn't mean he can't just decide to retire, but I don't really think there's any reason to expect that at this stage. So I'm fine with just doing the Jake Matthews restructure. That would be $9.5 million. That's really all the Falcons need, quote unquote, to get these signings completely covered. It just depends on how much money they want to carry into the season. Do they want to give Judon a new contract? Is that going to add a lot of new money? That sort of thing, and I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what the financials would be. It could reduce Judon's cap hit this year, probably not, but it could be a situation where they don't really need to create a ton more space this year. Jake Matthews is the second one. There's also Grady Jarrett. They could restructure him for $7.5. David Onyemata, they could restructure him for a small boost of $3.6 million. And obviously the AJ Terrell extension could free up to like $9 million essentially. I don't think they're going to do all of these. I don't think it's necessary. I think they'll probably do one of Matthews, Jarrett, or Terrell to start. And then if they need more money during the season, they can go to one of the other ones to create some extra space. But I do think, we'll see. They may get some extra savings from final cuts, depending on who they decide to cut. There could be some savings there. So we'll see what happens. But I do think that the team is in fine financial shape is the short version of this little conversation here. And yeah, I mean, I think, I had sent some tweets, obviously, over the last several months talking about, like, I'm just kind of like a little bit surprised the Falcons, it feels like they're building for like 2026 or 2025 because they're not really spending the money that they have. And I know that's not necessarily like clear because they didn't really have much cap space open at the time, but they had all this ability to create more. And it's like, well, they're not really maxing out because they could be using these restructures, doing an extension, this sort of stuff to create that space and go maximize this roster. They hadn't done that until right now. Right now, they're starting to do that, and they're still not like absolutely like pedal to the metal, like going all out. They don't need to do that to like be a good team. Like they don't really need to go that far. I think that would probably be irresponsible. So I'm glad they're not going that far. But I think now you can clearly say that this team is more focused on 2024 than it appeared just a few weeks ago. Basically, then it's been the whole offseason. And it's kind of a unique approach, right? I think that this sort of patient waiting approach, coupled with a very like future focused draft, I think it could really work out for them. I think it could be really good. So I'm glad to see these moves late, because I think we were all getting a little nervous. Like, are we really just going to kind of just roll with this and see what happens, and kind of accept that maybe our ceiling is winning a playoff game, which I would take that as a success. For the record, I would be very happy with that. I just, my fear was, and I've spoken about this at length on other shows, right, is that are we going to feel regret if we do get to the NFC Championship, like sort of miraculously, and then it's like, wow, if we had just done a couple more things, if we had drafted that pass rusher or made that trade or done that thing, could we have made the Super Bowl? Could we have actually had a chance at the Super Bowl? And we just didn't do it. So that's the fear. And I think that fear has kind of been calmed with this. I think they've clearly now made a big move on the edge. I think they've made a big move in the secondary. The one spot that we could probably consider like an option to upgrade would be corner 2, but they seem to have a group of guys that they like there. I think between Hughes, between Clark Phillips, between Antonio Hamilton, I think one of them will be okay. Hopefully better than okay, but again, when you have great safety play behind them, it doesn't really matter as much. You can take more chances. You can have a lot more help. Especially if you got 2 playmakers back there creating takeaways. Like you can give up a ton of yards and just take the ball away and it's fine, right? So I think the defense in particular, it's been solidified. It's in a much better place. The edge pass rush in particular, we all knew how bad that was going to be. The fact that that's probably not a glaring weakness anymore. I did another tweet where I said, like, I don't think they can fix edge. I don't really think that Judon fixes edge. I think it does make it no longer an absolute liability. I think Judon probably takes this edge group to like average, which is a big step from like worst in the NFL. So like, don't get me wrong. I do think that's a great move. Very much support it. Think it's critical for this defense. It's also critical he stays healthy. We'll talk about that probably later, but like it's an important move to get this edge group into like competency. I think the Simmons move is more like taking something that was like probably above average with Jessie Bates there, but the second one being kind of a mystery, to like elite. Like I think you've taken something that was in decent shape and made it a big strength of your team. So I think you get that elite safety play. You have that elite interior. I think they're going to have a very good linebacker core. Now you've got this like really strong middle of the defense that you can sort of build around. And maybe the outsides are a little bit sketchier. I think AJ Terrell obviously is going to be good on one side. Maybe you just got to find the other guy on the other side. I think D. Alford in the slot is going to be really good too. And then you got Judon, and you figure it out at the other edge, and you hope that you can do something, that's the hope. But I think the hope is much stronger now. I think there's a clear path to this defense being a top 15 unit. I obviously they couldn't just sit on their hands and hope that they could repeat last year. That was clear to me, because they were going to see big regression. They played some easier quarterbacks. They changed defensive coordinators. Like, it can be pretty sketchy. Like, it was going to be really sketchy if they were just trying to run it back and do that again. But I think they've made the right additions, the right changes. And also there's the idea of just the offense being competent, not turning the ball over like a ridiculous number of times, that it's just going to lead to better defensive play. So that's the hope. I believe in this hope. I think this was a great move to get Justin Simmons in here, really solidify that safety room, make it a strength of the team, get Judon in here, make the edge group not a glaring weakness anymore. And so now I think you look at this Falcons defense from top to bottom, and you can easily see a top 15 defense here. Like, I don't think they're going to push like the top defenses in the league or anything like that. It's within like the range of outcomes that they could just have a top 10 season or something like that. I still think this is going to be sort of a work in progress defense, but I think ultimately when it comes down to it, it's going to be good enough with the improvements to the offense that this team's not going to be held back by this defense. I think the defense will probably have some great games in them, probably have some bad games in them, but the idea is with the offense being as good as it should be, that we don't have to, like, it's going to be complementary football. There'll be some give and take, and the offense will be good enough to take advantage of those 20-point games that the defense gives up. Like the defense gives up 20 points. The offense scores more than 20 points. That was a big problem for the Arthur Smith years. So I think the offense will be able to score more than 20 points most weeks. So I'm excited to see this. I think this is really good stuff by Terry Fontenot. Shout out to AJ Terrell and Grady Jarrett for schmoozing up Jessie Bates. Players clearly want to be here. I think that was a part of the Judon move. I think the Patriots wanted to send him somewhere he wanted to go, and I think he wanted to come to Atlanta. And the same thing with Justin Simmons. He chose to sign here. He's burned the Saints, which you love to see that. He's going to be an instant hero in Atlanta because of that alone. So good move here. Really good series of moves. I think we all can sleep a lot easier on this Falcons defense going into the season right now with these two huge additions at the final hour. Better late than never. Happy to have them here. It definitely changes a lot in terms of my sort of interpretation of the strategy that they're going for. Again, I think it's kind of an unusual, it continues to be unusual, but it seems like there's a good chance that this could work out and that the patience actually is going to pay off here. So excited about it. Thank you guys for watching today. Again, I'm Kevin Knight at Falcaholic Kevin. Like, subscribe on YouTube, please. If you haven't done that yet, you could leave that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice if you haven't already done that. And we're kicking off our supporter fantasy league. So if you're a patron, if you're a YouTube channel member, make sure you look in those respective places or on the Falcaholic Discord, which the link is there, to get the link to sign up for those fantasy leagues. If you're not one of those things yet and you want to be in the fantasy leagues, you still got time. You can sign up either for Patreon. That's going to give you more of like the podcast stuff, like the podcast benefits, like the ad-limited podcast episodes and stuff like that. The YouTube one is going to give you more of the video-focused stuff, so if you're more of a video enjoyer, that's for you. Either one, any of the paid tiers will get you into the fantasy leagues. Just make sure you fill out that form, and we'll, of course, bump that over the next week, and those drafts will probably start after the third preseason game. So excited to have you all back for this year. They were a lot of fun the last couple of years. I'm looking forward to it once again. And yeah, check out thefalcaholic.com as well for all that written content, including we had a banger piece from Trayshawn going over some of the financial stuff I gave you, but he went more in depth into some other things as well, about the team building approach and some of their options this offseason. So check that out. I will have a roster projection coming for you. I decided to put that off to do because we have to talk about Justin Simmons, and it would have been wrong also, my roster projection, because I didn't have Justin Simmons on it. So I'm gonna have to rework that with Matthew Judon too. We'll get that out after the next preseason game. So that is going to come next week. But thank you guys so much for joining us here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm Kevin Knight. Once again, we will see you next time for our Falcons versus Ravens preseason week 2 watch party. We're going to be going live at 11:45 a.m. bright and early Eastern time for the second preseason game. Maybe we'll see some starters, probably not much, but it'll be a good time. Join Adon and I and some other guests on there for that. We'll see you then, guys. Have a great rest of your Friday. Until next time. See you, folks.